Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we are going deep into the world of psychology.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, and we're using a pretty cool source.
Okay.
We're using the Gale Encyclopedia of Psychology, and it's got some really interesting entries.
I'm excited.
I think we can pull out some really great stuff for this deep dive.
Cool.
So to get started, let's talk about achievement tests.
Okay.
This encyclopedia excerpt, we're looking at actually questions their validity.
Really?
Yeah, like how do we really know that these tests are actually measuring what they're supposed to?
Right. Yeah.
Like we all know someone who, is really smart but doesn't do well on tests.
Yeah. And what about things like, test anxiety? And that can definitely affect how someone performs.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you have to consider things like cultural bias. Do these tests really apply across different cultures?
Yeah, that's a huge point. It makes you wonder if these tests are really measuring ability or just how good someone is at taking a test. Okay, so let's move on to something a little less controversial.
Right.
Let's talk about adolescent independence and individuation.
Ah, the teenage years.
Yeah, that's right.
It's such a fascinating time. You have uh, this push and pull between wanting to be independent and still needing those parental figures.
Right. It's like they're trying to figure out who they are separate from their parents.
Exactly. And as they're doing that, their view of their parents starts to change too.
How so?
Well, they start to see their parents as individuals, not just as mom and dad.
Oh, I see.
They begin to recognize that their parents have their own lives, their own thoughts, their own struggles.
It's like they're seeing their parents in 3D for the first time.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about adoption.
Right.
Specifically, the evolving nature of adoption. Like, we've gone from closed adoptions to open adoptions, and more people are searching for their biological families.
Yeah. It's really interesting to think about the psychological impact of that. Like, does knowing your biological family change your sense of self?
It's a big question. And then there's the whole issue of why people search for their biological families. Is it about medical history? Is it about wanting to know where you come from? Is it both?
Right. And the stigma surrounding adoption has really decreased over the years, which has definitely played a role in the shift towards open adoptions.
It really makes you think about all the different factors that come into play in adoption.
Definitely.
All right, let's move on to a very influential organization in the world of psychology, the APA.
Oh, the American Psychiatric Association.
That's right. They do so much to support psychiatrists and advocate for mental health awareness.
Absolutely. And one of their most significant contributions is the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right, the DSM. It's like the Bible of mental health diagnosis.
That's a good way to think about it. It provides a common language and framework for understanding and classifying mental disorders.
And if you ever have the chance to attend their annual meeting, I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
It's incredible. The range of topics they cover is mind-blowing.
I bet.
It really shows you just how diverse and fascinating the field of mental health is.
Okay, so what's next on our deep dive agenda?
Well, let's talk about something that sheds light on how our brains process language. Broca's aphasia.
Ooh, interesting. I've always been fascinated by how our brains can do so many different things.
It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
And Broca's aphasia is a perfect example of how specialized different parts of our brains are.
Right. So tell me about it.
So basically, damage to a specific area of the brain called Broca's area can lead to this condition where people have trouble producing and understanding language.
Wow. So they know what they want to say, but they just can't get the words out.
Exactly. It's like their thoughts are trapped inside their heads.
I can't even imagine how frustrating that would be.
Yeah, it really highlights how crucial language is for communication and our daily lives. All right, let's move on to the world of clinical psychology, where we'll explore the work of those on the front lines of mental health care.
Okay. This is a field that's always intrigued me.
Yeah, it's pretty diverse, right? There are so many different approaches to treatment.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Definitely not. You have everything from psychoanalysis, which delves into the unconscious mind.
Like Freud?
Yes, exactly. To client-centered therapy, which focuses on empathy and creating a safe space for the client.
That was Carl Rogers.
You got it. And the settings where clinical psychologists work are just as diverse.
That's true. You'll find them in hospitals, schools, private practices, you name it.
They're like mental health detectives, helping people navigate those complex challenges of the mind.
That's a good analogy.
All right, ready for our next topic?
Hit me with it.
Okay, let's talk about Albert Bandura and his groundbreaking work on social learning theory.
Ah, Bandura. He really revolutionized our understanding of how we learn.
Absolutely. He challenged those old school behaviorist ideas that focus solely on rewards and punishments.
Right, he showed that we learn by observing others, even without any direct rewards or punishments.
Exactly. He called it observational learning or modeling.
And his Bobo doll experiment is a classic example of that. He showed that kids who watched adults being aggressive towards a Bobo doll were more likely to be aggressive themselves.
It's amazing how much we learn just by watching others.
Yeah, it's something we often don't even realize we're doing.
So true. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about child development and the work of Nancy Bailey.
All right, what did she do?
Well, what's fascinating about Bailey is her interdisciplinary approach to studying kids. She didn't just focus on psychology, she looked at biology and sociology too.
Interesting. So she recognized that there's more to development than just what's going on in a child's mind.
Exactly. She understood that kids are shaped by their environment, their interactions with others, and their cultural context.
Makes sense. So what kind of research did she do?
Well, she's known for her work on the correlation between infant size and adult size.
Huh. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're a big baby, you're more likely to be a tall adult.
That's the idea, yeah.
Cool.
She also studied the development of emotions in children.
I can imagine that was pretty challenging. Kids' emotions can be all over the place.
That's for sure. But her work really highlighted how those complex feelings emerge and evolve over time.
Okay, on to our next topic.
Let's dive into the work of Aaron T. Beck, the father of cognitive therapy.
Ooh, cognitive therapy. I've heard a lot about that.
Yeah, it's a really influential approach to therapy. And Beck's journey is particularly interesting because he started out as a traditional psychoanalyst.
So, like, following in Freud's footsteps.
Exactly. But then he started questioning some of Freud's core theories.
Really? What happened?
Well, he tried to find evidence to support Freud's ideas, like the connection between depression and masochism.
Masochism, like enjoying pain.
Right. But his research just didn't support it, so he started developing his own ideas, and that led him to cognitive therapy.
I see. So what's the main idea behind cognitive therapy?
It's all about how our thoughts influence our feelings and behaviors. Like, if we have negative thoughts, we're more likely to feel depressed or anxious.
That makes sense.
And by changing those negative thought patterns, we can change how we feel and behave.
So it's about challenging those negative thoughts and replacing them with more positive ones.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, what's next?
Let's shift gears again and explore behavior therapy, which is all about changing behavior, not just talking about it.
Okay. Sounds practical.
It is. It's very action-oriented. Instead of digging into the past like psychoanalysis does, behavior therapy focuses on what you can change in the here and now.
Interesting. So how does it work?
Well, it draws on the principles of classical and operant conditioning.
Ah, like Pavlov's dogs.
Exactly. And Skinner's work on reinforcement. It's all about understanding how our behaviors are shaped by the consequences that follow them.
So if you want to change behavior, you change the consequences.
Exactly. It's really amazing how those basic principles of learning can be applied to help people overcome phobias, manage anger, even develop healthy habits.
That's really cool. All right, what else is on our list for today?
Let's explore biofeedback, a technique that helps people gain control over their physiological processes.
Biofeedback. I've heard of it, but I'm not sure I understand exactly how it works.
Okay. Well, imagine having a window into your body's inner workings. That's kind of what biofeedback does.
So it's like a feedback loop.
Exactly. It provides real-time information about things like heart rate, muscle tension, even skin temperature.
And by seeing that information, people can learn to control those processes.
Yes. It's like becoming more aware of your body's signals and then learning to adjust them.
That's wild. So what can biofeedback be used for?
Oh, all sorts of things. Migraines, anxiety, hypertension, even chronic pain.
Wow, so it really has a wide range of application.
It does. It's really a fascinating technique.
All right, what's next on our agenda?
Well, let's step back from individual techniques and explore a theory that looks at families as interconnected systems. Murray Bowen's family systems theory.
Family systems theory, huh? Sounds intriguing.
It is. Bowen was a real visionary. He saw families as these complex systems where each member influences and is influenced by everyone else.
Okay, I'm starting to see the systems part.
Right. And he saw families as having their own emotional needs, their own patterns of behavior, their own ways of communicating.
So it's not just about the individual, it's about the whole family unit.
Exactly. And understanding those family dynamics can be really helpful in understanding individual behavior.
Okay, on to our next topic.
Sure. We've already talked about Pierre-Paul Broca and his discovery of Broca's area, but his contributions to science go way beyond that.
Oh yeah. Tell me more.
Well, he was a true Renaissance man, making significant contributions to both neuroscience and anthropology.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is. His work on the brain helped us understand that different areas have specialized functions.
So he was like a brain cartographer?
Exactly. And his work in anthropology explored human evolution and the diversity of the human family.
So he was interested in the big picture of what it means to be human.
Absolutely. He was a true pioneer.
Okay, ready for our next deep dive.
Let's talk about Mary Whiton Calkins, a remarkable woman who made significant contributions to psychology despite facing immense gender discrimination.
Oh, wow. I'm always inspired by stories of people overcoming adversity.
Her story is definitely inspiring. She actually qualified for and attended classes at Harvard, but she was denied admission to their graduate program because she was a woman.
That's awful.
It was a different time, but it's still shocking to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
But she didn't let that stop her. She went on to conduct groundbreaking research on memory and association and even developed a technique that's still widely used today.
That's incredible. What's the technique called?
It's called the paired associate technique. It's used to study how we learn and remember information.
She was a real trailblazer.
She was. And her contributions to the field of self-psychology are also significant.
I'm definitely going to have to read more about her.
You should. She's a fascinating figure in the history of psychology.
Okay, what's next on our list?
Let's talk about James McKeen Cattell, another influential figure in American psychology.
All right, what did he do?
Well, his research on intelligence testing wasn't actually all that successful.
Really? But you said he was influential.
He was. His impact on the field extended far beyond his research findings. He was a mentor to many future psychologists.
So he was like a teacher of teachers.
Exactly. He also played a key role in establishing influential psychology journals.
So he helped to shape the field by creating those platforms for sharing research.
Right. And he was also involved in establishing the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which shows his broader commitment to scientific advancement.
Okay, so his impact was really more about building the field than about his own research findings.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, what's next? My brain is getting a workout.
All right, let's take a closer look at the most complex organ in the human body, the brain.
Ooh, the brain, the command center of everything we do.
That's right. And we're going to focus on the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord.
Okay, so remind me, what exactly does the central nervous system do?
Well, it's basically the control center of our bodies. It receives information from the environment, processes that information, and then sends out signals to control our movements, our thoughts, our emotions, everything.
It's like the operating system of a computer.
That's a great analogy.
So tell me more about the brain. What are the main parts?
Well, there are three main parts: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain.
Okay, and what do those parts do?
Well, the forebrain is the most evolved part of the brain. It's responsible for higher level thinking, planning, decision-making, language, and all sorts of complex functions.
So it's like the executive suite of the brain.
Exactly. And within the forebrain, we have the cerebrum, which is the largest part of the brain.
I've heard of the cerebrum. What does it do?
It's responsible for all those things we associate with higher level thinking: language, memory, reasoning, problem solving, consciousness, and even personality.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. The cerebrum is what makes us human, you could say.
Okay, what about the other parts of the forebrain?
Well, there's the thalamus, which acts like a relay station for sensory information. All those signals from our senses, like sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, pass through the thalamus before being sent to other parts of the brain for processing.
So it's like a grand central station for sensory information.
Exactly. And then there's the hypothalamus, which is a tiny but powerful structure that controls a lot of our basic drives, like hunger, thirst, body temperature, and even sleep-wake cycles.
So it's like the brain's thermostat and appetite control center all rolled into one.
That's a good way to put it. And the hypothalamus also plays a role in our emotional responses.
Okay, so what about the midbrain?
The midbrain is involved in movement, attention, and even our sleep-wake cycle. It's like the brain's traffic controller, making sure everything flows smoothly.
And the hindbrain?
The hindbrain is the oldest and most primitive part of the brain. It's responsible for those basic life-sustaining functions like breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure.
So it's like the brain's basement where all the essential equipment is located.
That's one way to think about it. And within the hindbrain, we have the cerebellum, which is responsible for balance and coordination.
Like a tightrope walker or a dancer.
Exactly. And the medulla, which controls those vital functions like breathing and heart rate.
So even when we're asleep, the medulla is keeping us alive.
That's right. It's pretty amazing how all these different parts of the brain work together seamlessly.
It is. The brain is truly a marvel of nature.
Okay, let's move on to a topic that's a bit more serious but very important: child abuse.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is, and it's something we need to talk about more openly.
I agree.
So, what do we know about child abuse from a psychological perspective?
Well, there are many different forms of child abuse. Physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect. And the psychological impacts of abuse can be devastating.
Right. Children who experience abuse are more likely to struggle with a range of issues like depression, anxiety, PTSD, even substance abuse.
It can really affect their sense of self-worth and their ability to trust others.
And it can lead to those patterns of behavior that can continue into adulthood, those cycles of abuse that can be hard to break.
So it's important to recognize the signs of abuse and intervene early.
Absolutely. We all have a responsibility to protect children and ensure their safety and well-being.
Okay, on to the next topic.
Let's talk about a psychologist whose research had a profound impact on the fight for racial equality: Kenneth Bancroft Clark.
Kenneth Clark. I'm not familiar with his work.
Well, his research on the psychological effects of racial segregation was instrumental in the Brown v. Board of Education's Supreme Court case.
Oh, wow, that's huge.
It was. His work helped to demonstrate that segregation had a devastating impact on the self-esteem and development of Black children.
So his research was used as evidence to support the desegregation of schools.
Exactly. It was a landmark case that changed the course of history.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What else did he do?
Well, he continued to champion social justice throughout his career, working on community action programs and writing about the challenges faced by marginalized communities.
So he was a true advocate for social change.
He was. And his work reminds us of the power of research to challenge injustice and advocate for equality.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about a therapeutic approach that emphasizes empathy and unconditional positive regard. Client-centered therapy.
Ah, Carl Rogers.
You know it.
He really emphasized the importance of the therapist-client relationship, creating that safe and supportive space where clients can explore their thoughts and feelings without judgment.
So it's about creating a therapeutic environment where people feel heard and understood.
Exactly. Rogers believed that every individual has the potential for growth and self-actualization.
So the therapist's role is to help clients tap into that potential.
Right. It's about empowering clients to find their own solutions, to make their own choices, and to live their lives more authentically.
Okay, last one for today.
Let's wrap things up with a discussion of social dynamics in adolescence, focusing on those infamous cliques and the pressures to conform.
Teenage angst and the quest for belonging.
It's a universal experience, isn't it? That need to fit in, to find your tribe, to be accepted by your peers.
Yeah, we've all been there.
And cliques can offer a sense of belonging, but they can also be sources of intense pressure and even exclusion.
It's true. There's that fine line between fitting in and losing yourself.
And the dynamics of cliques can be really complex. They can be supportive and fun, but they can also be cruel and judgmental.
It's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Being true to yourself while also navigating those social complexities.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that those cliques don't last forever. Those high school hierarchies eventually fade away as we move into adulthood and find those connections based on shared interests and values.
That's reassuring. High school can be brutal.
It can. But it's also a time of tremendous growth and self-discovery.
True. It's all part of the journey, I guess.
It is. And I think we've had a pretty good journey ourselves today, exploring all these fascinating aspects of psychology.
I agree. My brain is full.
Mine too.
It's all part of the journey, I guess.
It is. So moving on from cliques, let's talk about a therapy approach that's been really helpful for kids and teens: cognitive behavior therapy.
Oh, CBT. Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's pretty popular, and for good reason. It's all about understanding the connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors.
Okay, so like how our thoughts can affect how we feel and act.
Exactly. It's like if you're constantly thinking negative thoughts, you're more likely to feel down or anxious, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And CBT helps people identify those negative thought patterns and then gives them tools to challenge those thoughts and replace them with more positive ones.
Well, it's like retraining your brain to think differently.
Exactly.
Cool. I like that.
All right, moving on to a fascinating theory that helps explain why we sometimes do things that don't align with our beliefs: Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance. Okay.
Have you ever, done something that you knew was wrong, but then tried to justify it in your head?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Like, I know I should eat healthier,
Right.
but then I eat a whole bag of chips and tell myself it's okay because I had a salad for lunch.
That's a perfect example. And that's basically what cognitive dissonance is all about. It's that mental discomfort we feel when our actions and our beliefs clash. And Festinger said that we try to reduce that discomfort by changing our beliefs or our behaviors.
So like in my chip example, I could either stop eating chips or change my belief that chips are unhealthy.
Exactly. We either change our behavior to align with our beliefs,
Right.
or we change our beliefs to justify our behavior.
Interesting. So we're always trying to maintain some sort of consistency in our minds.
Yeah, exactly. We don't like feeling like hypocrites.
That's true. It's true.
All right. Ready for our next deep dive?
Hit me.
Okay. Let's take a journey through the history of cognitive psychology, that branch of psychology that focuses on how our minds work.
Okay. Sounds fun. I always find it fascinating to see how ideas evolve over time.
Me too. So cognitive psychology really started with introspection.
Introspection.
Yeah, that's where people would try to observe and report on their own thoughts and feelings.
Like trying to catch a thought in a net.
Exactly. It was pretty subjective, but it was an early attempt to study those mental processes.
Right.
And then came behaviorism, which was all about studying observable behavior.
Ah, like ignoring the mind altogether.
Yeah, pretty much. The behaviorists believed that the mind was a black box that we couldn't study scientifically.
Okay.
But eventually, there was a resurgence of interest in mental processes, thanks to pioneers like Kurt Lewin, Jean Piaget, and the Gestalt psychologists.
So they brought the mind back into psychology.
They did. And that led to the cognitive revolution, which really transformed the field and brought us to where we are today.
It's amazing how psychology has evolved over the years.
It is. So speaking of evolution, let's explore the world of animal behavior with comparative psychology.
Ooh, animals.
Yeah. Comparative psychology is all about studying animal behavior to understand how different species have adapted to their environments and how their behaviors have evolved over time.
So we can learn about ourselves by studying animals.
Exactly. And there are two main approaches to this. In America, the focus has often been on lab-based research, looking at the effects of environment on behavior.
Like those experiments with rats in mazes.
Exactly. But in Europe, ethology has been more dominant, which involves studying animals in their natural habitats.
Ah, so observing them in the wild.
Right. And comparative psychology has all sorts of applications. It can help us understand those evolutionary relationships between different species, shed light on human behavior, test psychological theories, and even aid in conservation efforts.
Cool. So what's next?
Well, let's dive into the world of consumer behavior, a field that combines psychology, economics, and even a bit of sociology.
Consumer behavior, so like why we buy the things we buy.
Exactly. It's all about understanding those factors, both conscious and unconscious, that influence our purchasing decisions.
Interesting. So like marketing and advertising play a role.
Absolutely. Consumer psychologists study how those marketing messages influence our perceptions of products, our emotions, and ultimately our buying decisions.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's not just about advertising, right? There are probably all sorts of psychological factors at play.
Oh, yeah. Things like our need for belonging, our desire for status, our emotional state, even our cultural background can all influence what we buy and why.
It's like a whole science behind shopping.
It is. It's pretty fascinating.
All right.
All right, let's move on to a cognitive process that's essential for problem solving. Convergent thinking.
Convergent thinking, huh? What's that?
It's that process of narrowing down possibilities to arrive at a single best solution. It's like focusing a laser beam on a specific target.
Okay.
It's the opposite of divergent thinking, which is about generating multiple ideas and exploring all sorts of possibilities.
Ah, so convergent thinking is more about analysis and decision making.
Exactly. And it's a skill that's really important in many areas of life, from academic problem solving to making decisions in our personal lives.
Okay. I'm starting to see how that could be useful.
All right, ready to delve into a unique aversion therapy technique?
Sure, bring it on.
Okay, it's called covert sensitization, and it uses the power of mental imagery to create an aversion to an unwanted behavior.
Ooh, that sounds intense.
It can be. Imagine you're trying to quit smoking.
Mm-hmm.
A therapist using covert sensitization might ask you to vividly imagine yourself lighting up a cigarette,
Okay.
taking a puff, and then immediately experiencing something really unpleasant, like intense nausea or vomiting.
Ew, I can see how that would be aversive.
Right. The goal is to create such a strong negative association in your mind that you're less likely to engage in that behavior.
So it's like classical conditioning, but with mental imagery instead of real stimuli.
Exactly. It's all about rewiring those neural pathways.
Okay, on to the next topic.
Let's take a break from therapy techniques and wander into the realm of daydreams.
Ooh, daydreams. I'm a pro at those.
Me too. Those mental escapes, those flights of fancy where our minds wander, conjuring up all sorts of scenarios.
Yeah, it's like having your own personal movie theater in your head.
Exactly. And daydreams can serve different purposes. Sometimes they're just those temporary escapes from reality.
Right, like a mental vacation.
Other times, they can be tools for problem solving, those mental rehearsals for upcoming events, or even those outlets for creativity.
So they can actually be productive.
They can, and it's important to distinguish daydreams from hallucinations, those perceptual experiences that occur without any external stimuli.
Right, hallucinations can be a sign of mental illness.
Exactly. Daydreams are those fleeting thoughts, those wispy clouds drifting through our minds, while hallucinations are more like those vivid, persistent images that can be really distressing.
Okay, good distinction.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about a condition that affects memory and cognitive function: dementia.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is, and it's becoming more common as the population ages.
Right. But it's important to remember that dementia is not a normal part of aging.
Exactly. It's a disease process that affects the brain.
So what happens in the brain when someone has dementia?
Well, there's a gradual deterioration of brain cells, which leads to a decline in cognitive function.
So it affects memory, thinking, language, all those things.
Right. And there are different types of dementia, the most common being Alzheimer's disease.
Right, I've heard of that one.
And while there's no cure for dementia, there are treatments that can help manage the symptoms and slow the progression of the disease.
So it's about providing support and care for those affected by dementia.
Exactly. It's a challenging condition, both for the individuals and their families.
Okay, on to our next topic.
Let's dive into another challenging topic: depression, that mood disorder that can have a profound impact on a person's life.
Depression, yeah. It's something that affects so many people.
It does, and it's more than just feeling sad or down. It's a pervasive feeling of hopelessness, loss of interest in things you used to enjoy, changes in sleep and appetite, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, even thoughts of death or suicide.
It's like this dark cloud that follows you everywhere.
That's a good way to put it.
So what causes depression?
Well, it's complex, a combination of biological, psychological, and social factors.
Right. It's not just one thing.
Exactly. We know that there are genetic predispositions, but environmental factors like stress, trauma, and social isolation can also play a role.
And what about those neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine? I've heard those are involved.
They are. Imbalances in those neurotransmitters can contribute to depression, and that's where antidepressants come in.
Oh, right. Those medications that help regulate those neurotransmitters.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that medication is just one part of treatment.
Right. Therapy is important too.
Absolutely. Therapy can help people understand the underlying causes of their depression, develop coping mechanisms for managing their symptoms, and even change those negative thought patterns that contribute to their depressed mood.
So it's a multi-pronged approach?
It is. And lifestyle changes like getting enough sleep, eating a healthy diet, and exercising regularly can also make a big difference.
This is about taking care of your mental and physical health.
Exactly. All right, let's shift gears a bit and tackle a philosophical question that has puzzled thinkers for centuries: the nature of free will.
Ooh, free will. That's a big one.
It is. Do we truly have control over our choices? Or are our actions predetermined by our genes, our upbringing, our environment?
It's like that age-old question, nature versus nurture.
Exactly. And there's no easy answer. Some people believe that our biology dictates our destiny, that we're essentially puppets controlled by our genes.
So, like, we don't really have a choice in how we behave.
Right. But others argue that we do have free will, that we can make conscious choices that override those biological predispositions.
So we're not just robots following a pre-programmed script.
Exactly. And the truth probably lies somewhere in between. We're influenced by both nature and nurture, but we also have the capacity to make choices and shape our own destinies.
Well, it's like a dance between those two forces.
I like that analogy. Okay, let's move on to a condition that raises fascinating questions about the nature of identity. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID.
DID. Isn't that what used to be called multiple personality disorder?
That's right. It's a complex condition characterized by the presence of two or more distinct identities within a single individual.
Wow, so like having multiple personalities?
In a way, yes. Each identity or alter has its own unique thoughts, feelings, memories, even behaviors.
So it's like having multiple people living inside one body.
It can feel that way for people with DID, and the transitions between these identities can be triggered by stress, trauma, or even specific cues in the environment.
So it's like a coping mechanism for dealing with overwhelming experiences.
Exactly. It's a way for the mind to protect itself from unbearable pain.
That's both fascinating and scary.
It is. And it's important to remember that DD is a real condition, not just something you see in movies.
Right. Okay, what's next on our deep dive list?
Let's drift into the world of dreams, those nightly journeys into the depths of our subconscious minds.
Ah, dreams. Those mysterious and often bizarre experiences that leave us wondering what they all mean.
Exactly. Dreams have fascinated people for centuries, and there are many theories about why we dream and what those dreams mean.
So, like Freud's theory about dreams being the royal road to the unconscious.
Right. Freud believed that dreams revealed those hidden desires and repressed conflicts that lurk beneath the surface of our conscious awareness.
And what about those other theories, like the idea that dreams help us process emotions or consolidate memories?
Those are popular theories too, and some researchers believe that dreams are simply those random firings of neurons during REM sleep, and that our brains try to make sense of that neural activity by creating those narratives, those stories that we experience as dreams.
So it's like our brains are those storytellers, even when we're asleep.
Exactly. And regardless of why we dream, those dreams can be a fascinating window into those workings of our minds, those hidden landscapes of our imaginations.
I agree. I've always found my dreams to be both intriguing and perplexing.
Me too. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about a learning disability that affects reading, writing, and spelling. Dyslexia.
Dyslexia, okay. I've heard that's pretty common.
It is. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects the way the brain processes language.
So it's not about intelligence, it's about how the brain processes information.
Exactly. And people with dyslexia often struggle with decoding words, even though they're perfectly intelligent and capable of understanding spoken language.
It must be really frustrating.
It is. And it's important to remember that dyslexia is not a sign of laziness or a lack of effort.
Right. It's a real condition that requires specific interventions and support.
Exactly. And with the right support, people with dyslexia can learn and succeed just like anyone else.
Okay, next topic.
Let's take a closer look at the work of Hermann Ebbinghaus, a pioneer in the scientific study of memory.
Hermann Ebbinghaus, huh? What did he do?
Well, he was really interested in understanding the basic principles of memory, how we learn and forget information. And to study this, he used himself as a subject, memorizing lists of nonsense syllables, those meaningless combinations of letters.
Wow, that sounds tedious.
It was. But his research led to some really important discoveries about memory, like the forgetting curve.
The forgetting curve, what's that?
It's that classic finding that shows how quickly we forget information over time if we don't actively try to remember it.
So like, if you learn something new but don't review it, you'll forget most of it pretty quickly.
Exactly. And that's why repetition and spaced practice are so important for learning and remembering information.
So cramming for a test at the last minute isn't the best strategy.
Not if you want to remember the information long term.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay.
What else did Ebbinghaus discover?
Well, he also discovered the spacing effect, which shows that we learn more effectively when we spread our study sessions out over time rather than cramming everything in at once.
So like studying a little bit each day is better than studying for hours the night before a test.
Exactly.
Cool. All right, what's next on our list?
Let's shift our focus from memory to the intricate workings of the brain's communication network, specifically the work of John C. Eccles, a neuroscientist who made groundbreaking discoveries about how neurons communicate.
Neurons, huh? Those tiny cells that transmit information throughout the nervous system.
That's right. And Eccles was fascinated by those tiny gaps between neurons called synapses, where those chemical messengers called neurotransmitters relay signals from one neuron to the next.
It's like those tiny sparks jumping across a gap.
Exactly. And Eccles meticulously studied those electrical and chemical processes involved in synaptic transmission, helping us to understand how those signals travel throughout the brain and the body.
So he was like a translator, deciphering the language of the brain.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, ready for our next deep dive.
Let's step into the classroom and explore the field of educational psychology, where psychological principles meet the art and science of teaching and learning.
Oh, educational psychology. I could see how that would be a fascinating field.
It is. Educational psychologists apply those insights from psychology to improve teaching methods, design effective learning environments, and create curricula that engage and motivate students.
So they're like those architects of learning.
Exactly. They might study how different learning styles affect academic performance, or the impact of technology on student engagement,
Right.
or the best ways to support students with learning disabilities.
So they're really trying to understand how students learn best and then create those environments that optimize learning.
Ah, that's the goal. It's about using psychological principles to make education more effective and enjoyable for everyone.
Okay, what's next on our agenda?
Let's explore a tool that has revolutionized our understanding of brain activity. The electroencephalograph, or EEG.
Ah, the EEG. I've seen those in movies. It's like that cap with all those wires that they put on your head.
That's the one. And those wires are actually electrodes that detect those tiny electrical signals generated by brain cells.
So it's like listening to the electrical symphony of the brain.
Exactly. And those electrical signals are then amplified and displayed as wave patterns on a screen, allowing researchers to study those patterns and learn about how the brain works.
So it's a way to see brain activity in real time.
That's right. And the EEG has been used to study all sorts of things, from sleep and dreaming to epilepsy and the effects of drugs on the brain.
Wow, so it's a really versatile tool.
It is. And it's even being used in neurofeedback training, which helps people learn to regulate their own brainwave activity.
So you can train your brain to be more focused or more relaxed.
That's the idea.
That's pretty cool.
It is. Okay, ready to tackle the age-old debate of nature versus nurture.
Oh yeah, that one never gets old.
It's a classic. Are we products of our genes or our environment? Are our traits and abilities predetermined, or are we shaped by our experiences?
It's like a chicken-egg question.
Exactly. And the answer, as with most things in psychology, is that it's complex. Both nature and nurture play a role, but how they interact is still a subject of much debate.
Right, it's not a simple either-or proposition.
Definitely not. And this debate often comes up when we talk about intelligence.
Like, are people born smart, or can intelligence be developed?
Exactly. And the answer is, again, it's complicated. We know that genes play a role in intelligence, but so do environmental factors like access to education, nutrition, and even those stimulating experiences in early childhood.
So, like, even if you have the genetic potential for high intelligence, you might not reach your full potential if you don't have the right environment.
That's right. It's a reminder that we need to provide all children with those opportunities and resources they need to thrive.
Okay, next topic.
Let's explore the concept of ethics, those principles that guide our moral judgments and help us distinguish right from wrong.
Ethics, huh? That's a big one.
It is. It's about understanding those values that shape our behavior, those principles that help us make decisions that are both morally sound and beneficial to ourselves and others.
So it's about more than just following rules. It's about understanding the why behind those rules.
Exactly. And there are different theories about how we develop our sense of ethics. Some psychologists believe that moral development progresses through a series of stages, from a focus on avoiding punishment to a more complex understanding of universal ethical principles.
So like from, I don't want to get in trouble, to, I understand that this action is wrong because it violates a fundamental moral principle.
That's the general idea. And others argue that moral development is more about care and compassion than about justice and rights.
So like a more feminine perspective on ethics.
That's one way to think about it. And of course, there's always the debate about the role of nature versus nurture in moral development.
Right. Are we born with a sense of morality, or do we learn it from our environment?
It's a fascinating question. And again, the answer is likely a combination of both. Our genes may provide us with a predisposition towards certain moral values, but our experiences shape how those values are expressed.
So we're not just products of our genes or our environment. We're a product of that interaction between the two.
Exactly. Okay, ready to dive into the world of existential psychology.
Existential psychology. Sounds deep.
It is. It's a school of thought that emphasizes human freedom, responsibility, and the search for meaning in a world that can often feel absurd and chaotic.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Think of those existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Simone de Beauvoir. They were grappling with those big questions about the meaning of life, the nature of existence, and the human condition.
Yeah, those are heavy topics.
They are. And existential psychologists took those philosophical ideas and applied them to the realm of psychology.
So it's about helping people find meaning and purpose in their lives.
Exactly. One of the key figures in existential psychology is Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the Holocaust.
Oh, wow. That's an experience that would definitely make you question the meaning of life.
It did. And Frankl's experiences in the concentration camps led him to develop logotherapy, a form of therapy that focuses on helping people find meaning in their lives, even in the face of suffering.
So it's about finding that will to live, that purpose that keeps you going, even when things are tough.
Exactly. Frankl believed that everyone has that will to meaning, that innate drive to find meaning and purpose in their lives. And he argued that We have the freedom to choose our attitude, to find meaning even in the most difficult circumstances.
That's a powerful message.
It is. Okay, ready for a shift from the existential to the experimental.
Bring it on.
All right, let's talk about a fundamental principle of scientific research: the use of experimental and control groups.
Oh, that's that classic experimental design where you have two groups, one that gets the treatment and one that doesn't.
That's right. And by comparing those two groups, you can determine whether the treatment had an effect.
So it's isolating the effects of the variable you're interested in.
Exactly. Imagine you're testing a new drug for anxiety. You would randomly assign participants to either the experimental group, which gets the drug, or the control group, which gets a placebo, a sugar pill that looks like the drug but has no active ingredients. And by comparing those two groups, you can determine whether the drug is actually effective or whether any improvements are simply due to the placebo effect.
Right, that placebo effect can be pretty powerful. Just believing that you're getting a treatment can sometimes lead to improvements.
It's amazing how much our minds can influence our bodies.
It is. Okay, so what's next?
Let's delve into the work of Hans Eysenck, a psychologist who made significant contributions to the study of personality.
Personality, huh? That's something I've always been curious about. Like, what makes people tick?
Exactly. And Eysenck was all about trying to understand those underlying dimensions of personality, those basic traits that shape who we are.
Okay.
He developed a model of personality based on 3 dimensions: extroversion, introversion, neuroticism, stability, and psychoticism, superego, strength.
Okay, break that down for me.
So extroversion is about how outgoing and sociable a person is. Introversion is the opposite. It's about being more reserved and inward focused.
I've definitely heard those terms before.
Yeah, they're pretty common. And neuroticism is about emotional stability. People high in neuroticism tend to be more anxious, worried, and prone to mood swings.
Okay.
And people low in neuroticism are more emotionally stable and resilient.
And what about psychoticism?
That dimension is a bit more controversial. Eysenck saw it as a measure of, like, how unconventional or rebellious a person is. People high in psychoticism tend to be more impulsive, aggressive, and even creative.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to be high in psychoticism.
Not necessarily. It just means you might be more prone to thinking outside the box, challenging norms, and taking risks.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand Eysenck's model.
And what's really fascinating is that Eysenck believed these personality dimensions were rooted in our biology, in the structure and function of our nervous systems.
So our personalities are shaped by our genes, our brains, our nervous system.
That was his theory, yeah.
Okay, on to our next topic.
Let's dive into the depths of the unconscious mind with the work of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis.
Freud. The man who made the unconscious conscious.
That's a good way to put it. Freud's ideas have been incredibly influential, though also controversial.
Right, I've heard that some of his theories have been debunked.
They have. But his work was groundbreaking for its time, and it still has relevance today.
So what were some of his main ideas?
Well, he believed that our unconscious mind, those thoughts, feelings, and memories that we're not aware of, play a huge role in shaping our behavior.
Okay.
He also emphasized the importance of early childhood experiences, arguing that those experiences can have a lasting impact on our adult personalities.
Right, like those unresolved childhood conflicts can manifest as problems in adulthood.
Exactly. And Freud also developed those concepts of defense mechanisms.
Defense mechanisms.
Yeah, those unconscious strategies we use to protect ourselves from anxiety and emotional pain.
Like repression, denial, projection.
You got it. Those are all classic defense mechanisms. And Freud's work was really groundbreaking in its exploration of the human psyche, even if some of his specific theories have been challenged over the years.
It's like he opened up a whole new way of understanding the mind.
He did. And his influence can still be felt today, even in those areas of psychology that have moved beyond his original theories.
All right, what's next on our deep dive list?
Let's explore the work of Sir Francis Galton, a polymath who made contributions to a wide range of fields, including statistics, psychology, and even genetics.
A polymath, huh? Sounds like a real Renaissance man.
He was. And he was a cousin of Charles Darwin, which influenced his thinking about human intelligence.
Oh, how so?
Well, he was a proponent of the idea that intelligence is largely inherited, just like physical traits.
So he believed that we're born with a certain level of intelligence that's determined by our genes.
Right, and he was a pioneer in the field of psychometrics, developing those statistical methods for measuring human abilities and traits.
So he was trying to quantify those things that make us unique.
Exactly. And he also coined the term nature versus nurture.
Ah, that famous...
Yes. But it's important to note that Galton's views on intelligence and heredity were also influenced by those ideas about eugenics, those beliefs that society should encourage the breeding of people with desirable traits.
Oh, eugenics. That's a pretty controversial topic.
It is. And those ideas were later used to justify some pretty horrific practices like forced sterilization.
Right. It's a reminder that even brilliant minds can be misguided, and that scientific ideas can be used for harmful purposes.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to a topic that's central to child development: gender constancy.
Gender constancy, what's that?
It's that understanding that gender is a stable and permanent characteristic, regardless of changes in appearance or behavior.
So like knowing that even if a boy wears a dress, he's still a boy.
Exactly. And this understanding typically develops around the age of 6 or 7.
Okay.
Before that, kids often think that gender is determined by external factors like clothes or hairstyles.
Ah, so they might think that if a girl cuts her hair short, she becomes a boy.
Right. But once they achieve gender constancy, they understand that gender is an internal sense of self that doesn't change based on outward appearances.
That makes sense.
Okay, ready to revisit the world of perception?
Sure, bring it on.
All right, let's dive back into those principles of Gestalt psychology, that school of thought that emphasizes the holistic nature of perception, how our brains organize those sensory bits and pieces into those meaningful wholes.
Ah, Gestalt psychology. I remember learning about that in my Intro to Psych class. Wasn't it all about those optical illusions and how our brains try to make sense of patterns?
That's a big part of it. Those Gestalt psychologists argued that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, that we don't just see a bunch of isolated lines and shapes, we see those meaningful patterns and relationships.
Right, like those illusions where you can see two different images depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. Those are great examples of how our brains actively organize those sensory experiences to create meaning.
Okay, so what are some of those Gestalt principles?
Well, there's that principle of figure ground perception, that ability to distinguish an object from its background.
Okay.
Think of a vase against a wall or a word on a page. Our brains automatically figure out what's the figure and what's the ground.
Right.
And there's that principle of closure, where our brains tend to complete those incomplete figures, like filling in the gaps to perceive a whole object.
Oh, yeah, like those connect the dots puzzles where you see a shape even though it's just a bunch of dots.
Exactly. And there's also that principle of similarity, where we group together those objects that are similar in shape, color, or size.
Okay, so our brains are always looking for patterns and trying to make sense of things.
That's right. It's all about creating order out of chaos.
Okay, what's next?
Let's shift gears and watch those little ones learn to move and groove as we explore motor development in children.
Ah, those wobbly first steps and those clumsy attempts to catch a ball.
It's amazing to watch how kids develop those physical skills, isn't it? It's amazing to watch how kids develop those physical skills, isn't it?
It is. It's like they're constantly experimenting, pushing those boundaries, figuring out what their bodies can do.
And it's not just about learning to walk and run. It's about those finer motor skills, too, like those hand-eye coordination needed to write or draw.
Right. And those fine motor skills are so important for so many things, from those everyday tasks to those more specialized activities.
Exactly. It's all part of that amazing process of development.
Okay. Ready for our next deep dive?
Let's venture into those strange and sometimes unsettling experiences of hallucinations, those perceptions that occur in the absence of any external stimuli.
Hallucinations. So like seeing things that aren't really there.
That's one type of hallucination, visual hallucinations. But hallucinations can involve any of our senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell.
Wow, so it's like your senses are playing tricks on you.
Exactly. And hallucinations can be a symptom of those mental illnesses like schizophrenia,
Right, I've heard about that.
but they can also be caused by drug use, sleep deprivation, even extreme stress or trauma.
So there are lots of different things that can trigger hallucinations.
There are. And while hallucinations can be very distressing, they can also be fascinating from a psychological perspective. They offer a glimpse into how our brains construct our reality.
It's true. It's like those boundaries between perception and imagination can become blurred.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to a topic that has been the subject of much debate and misunderstanding: homosexuality.
Homosexuality, yeah, it's something that people have a lot of strong opinions about.
They do, and unfortunately, those opinions haven't always been based on scientific understanding.
Right, like those outdated views that homosexuality is a mental illness.
Exactly. But we now know that homosexuality is a normal and healthy variation in human sexuality.
It's just part of the spectrum of human diversity.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that sexual orientation is not a choice. It's part of who we are.
It's like trying to choose your eye color.
Mhm.
It's just not something you can control.
Good analogy. All right, let's talk about a psychologist whose research played a key role in changing those attitudes towards homosexuality. Evelyn Hooker.
Evelyn Hooker. I don't think I've heard of her.
Well, she conducted those groundbreaking studies in the 1950s comparing the psychological well-being of homosexual and heterosexual men.
And what did she find?
She found that there were no significant differences in psychological adjustment between the two groups.
So her research challenged those stereotypes that portrayed homosexual men as maladjusted or emotionally unstable.
Exactly. Her work was really important in helping to depathologize homosexuality.
It's amazing how much progress has been made in understanding and accepting sexual diversity.
It is. And we owe a lot to those pioneers like Evelyn Hooker who challenged those prevailing views and fought for equality.
Okay, what's next?
Let's shift gears and explore the world of hormones, those chemical messengers that play such a crucial role in our physical and emotional well-being.
Hormones, okay. I know they're important, but I'm not sure I understand exactly how they work.
Well, think of them as those tiny messengers that travel through our bloodstream, carrying signals from one part of the body to another.
Okay.
They regulate all sorts of things like growth and development, metabolism, mood, energy levels, even sleep.
So they're kind of like those air traffic controllers of the body, making sure everything runs smoothly.
It's a good way to put it. And the hypothalamus, a tiny but powerful region in the brain, is like the master conductor of those hormones.
So it's like the brain is sending out those signals to the rest of the body, telling it what to do.
Exactly. And those hormonal imbalances can lead to all sorts of problems.
Right, like thyroid problems can affect your metabolism, and those imbalances in estrogen or testosterone can affect your mood and your sex drive.
Exactly. It's all interconnected.
Okay, on to our next deep dive.
Let's explore a school of thought that emphasizes those positive aspects of human nature. Humanistic psychology.
Humanistic psychology. Not sure I'm familiar with that one.
Well, it emerged in the mid-20th century as a reaction to those more deterministic schools of thought, like psychoanalysis and behaviorism.
So it's more about those free will and self-determination.
Exactly. Humanistic psychologists believe that each individual has those inherent drive towards growth, self-discovery, and the fulfillment of their unique potential.
So it's a more optimistic view of human nature.
It is. They believe that we're not just products of our past or our environment, but that we have the power to make choices and create those meaningful lives.
I like that.
And some of the key figures in humanistic psychology are Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers.
Oh yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
You got it. That's one of those most famous concepts to come out of humanistic psychology.
Right, that pyramid with those basic needs at the bottom and self-actualization at the top.
Exactly. Maslow believed that we need to meet those basic needs, like those physiological and safety needs, before we can strive for those higher level needs, like love, belonging, esteem, and eventually self-actualization.
So it's like a ladder. You have to climb those lower rungs before you can reach the top.
That's a good way to think about it.
And what about Carl Rogers?
Well, he's known for his client-centered therapy, which emphasizes those qualities of empathy, unconditional positive regard, and genuineness on the part of the therapist.
So it's about creating that safe and supportive environment where clients can explore those feelings and make those own choices.
Exactly. Rogers believed that everyone has the capacity for growth and self-healing, and that the therapist's role is to facilitate that process.
Okay, ready for our next deep dive.
Let's journey back to those earliest stages of life and explore the fascinating world of infancy, that time of rapid growth and those formation of those crucial social and emotional bonds.
Ah, those tiny humans. So much potential packed into those little bodies.
It's amazing to witness those transformations that happen in those first few years of life, from those helpless newborns to those curious and mobile infants.
Right, and those early experiences, those early relationships can have such a profound impact on their development.
They do. Infants are like those sponges, absorbing those information, those experiences, those emotions from their environment.
And those early social interactions are so important for those development of attachment.
Absolutely. Attachment is that deep and enduring bond between an infant and their primary caregivers. That emotional connection that provides those sense of security, comfort, and love.
And it's not just about feeling loved, it's about feeling safe and secure, knowing that someone's there for you, that you're not alone.
Exactly. And those different patterns of attachment can have a lasting impact on a child's emotional well-being and their relationships with others throughout life.
So like if a child has a secure attachment with their caregivers, they're more likely to develop healthy relationships in adulthood.
That's the idea. Secure attachment provides that foundation for trust, intimacy, and emotional regulation.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move on to those teenage years, that often turbulent time of transition from childhood to adulthood. Adolescence?
Ah, adolescence. Those hormones, those mood swings, those peer pressures, those quests for identity.
It's a roller coaster ride for sure.
It is, and it's a time of tremendous physical, emotional, and social changes.
Puberty is a big one, obviously. Those physical transformations can be pretty dramatic.
They can. And the hormonal surges that accompany puberty can also trigger those mood swings and emotional intensity.
Right. And then there's that whole social navigation of high school, trying to fit in, figure out who you are, deal with those peer pressures.
It's a lot to handle, and some teens struggle more than others with those challenges.
Yeah, for sure. Some teens are more resilient than others.
And some have more support than others. Parental support is crucial during this time, as is access to mental health resources if needed.
It takes a village to raise a teenager.
It does. Okay, let's zoom in on a specific concern that often arises during adolescence. Teenage crime.
Teenage crime, yeah, that's a complex issue.
It is. And it's important to remember that most teenagers don't engage in criminal behavior.
Right, it's a small minority.
But those teens who do engage in crime often face a combination of risk factors, like poverty, peer pressure, lack of parental supervision, even mental health issues.
So it's not just about being a bad kid. It's about understanding those underlying factors that contribute to criminal behavior.
Exactly. And there are things we can do to prevent teenage crime, like providing those support services for at-risk youth, creating those opportunities for positive social engagement, and addressing those systemic issues like poverty and inequality.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, just like with so many other issues we've talked about today.
It is. It's about recognizing the complexity of human behavior and understanding that there are no easy answers.
That's a good takeaway, I think.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of psychology. We've covered so much ground today, from those basic principles of learning and memory to those complexities of personality and social behavior, those challenges of mental health, and the search for meaning and purpose in life.
My brain is officially full.
Mine too. But it's a good kind of full, right? The kind that makes you want to learn more, to keep exploring those mysteries of the human mind.
Absolutely. This has been a fascinating journey.
It has. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed the ride as well. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those hearts open to the wonders of psychology.